Trump's words spooked Putin. After one promise, the Kremlin suddenly showed interest in dialogue with the US. We'll discuss this and more with Sergei Aslanyan, host of Khodorkovsky Live. Sergey, great to see you. But first, let's focus on the talks between Russia and China's foreign ministers about US relations and prospects for ending the war in Ukraine. Yesterday in Beijing, Sergei Lavrov met with Wang Yi. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, the sides discussed the US position and possible ways to resolve the Ukrainian conflict, as it's called in China. What tactical signals can Lavrov's visit to Beijing suggest, and how seriously does China see itself as a mediator between Moscow and Washington? China, risking its own reputation, has begun to publicly support Russia in the political arena, arguing that Russia's defeat is not in its interests, and it is not ready to make concessions to anyone. Russia will not lose because China is behind it. However, the meeting between the two diplomats is unequal. The Russian foreign minister does not present his own position. In the country, the right to speak for the state belongs to one person. Lavrov arrived as a transmitter of information, while Wang Yi is a decision-making figure who influences China's domestic and foreign policy. Thus, one conveyed the message and the other listened attentively. This meeting, although symbolic, has no serious consequences other than demonstrating the consistency of the Chinese position. China said, "Russia is our ally. We will not let it lose." Then there is the ministerial meeting, the content of which is not decisive. It is just another element in China's strategy to strengthen its alliance with Russia. Why does China need Russia? China benefits economically. The Russian economy is vulnerable and dependent on Chinese supplies. If Beijing refuses to cooperate, it can cut off supplies and not disclose the facts of trade. Border controls are formalized. China has built infrastructure in the area of the former Far Eastern Military District, which emphasizes its interest in the region. China built a drone factory that was discovered only after construction was completed. All stages, from design to launch, went unnoticed by the intelligence services. Now that China's most powerful drone factory has appeared in Russia, the hidden strategy becomes obvious. China is acting pragmatically and purposefully, not demonstrating moves but focusing on benefits, both financial and political. Statements of support for Russia sound loud, but concrete actions remain out of sight. Building a factory, possible supplies of equipment or military aid. All of this can happen without official statements. If China remains silent, the world public will not know the details. China needed to demonstrate its support for Russia at the global level. This is necessary for the whole world to realize that despite pressure from the United States and Europe, no matter what steps are taken against Russia's interests, China remains a loyal ally. It has made its choice and has no intention of abandoning its partnership. China will support Russia, and together with it, Russia expects to win. Therefore, even if the US increases aid to Ukraine, even if NATO prepares for confrontation, China intends to maintain a strategic tie with Russia. Whatever successes Moscow's opponents expect, China will not let Russia lose. Russia will not be defeated. China has a strong interest in its sustainability as a key power not only in the region, but also on the global stage. Even if Western leaders, Macron, the British government, Germany, show growing strategic maturity, and Trump may soon change his positions as well, this does not change the point. Geopolitical forces are strengthening, but Russia retains influence. No matter how much arms supplies to Ukraine increase, no matter how much NATO's military readiness grows, Moscow's factor remains decisive. Even if there are threats of bombings supposedly promised by Trump in eras long past, they lack reality. Any future moves must take into account that Russia remains a player, and China has made the choice to support it and accommodate its interests.
Имейте в виду, что вам всегда впредь придется учитывать наличие Москвы как геополитического фактора в регионе и на планете Земля, потому что Китай сделал свой выбор.
This is important and dangerous. Even a weakened Russia, on the verge of exhaustion and collapse, remains a factor that cannot be ignored. Russia's problem cannot be solved permanently, even with the loss of its nuclear arsenal, the departure of its political leadership, and the collapse of its government. Russia retains influence because China is behind it. Attempts to build a coalition, rearm, and contain or defeat Russia are doomed to failure. The world must keep this in mind. China supports Russia. Beijing has its own interests and strategies. It actively participates in global politics and shapes its own vision of the world, as do others, such as Brazil or Argentina, whose analysts also offer their own interpretations of what is happening.
И у Китая, поскольку у него свои задачи, Китай тоже очень любит заниматься политикой. Китай, например, там пишет карту мира. Так Бразилия тоже пишет карту мира. В Аргентине, если спросить аргентинских аналитиков, что они посоветуют товарищу Зеленскому?
Argentine and Kyrgyz analysts also claim to have a roadmap for ending the war. Almost everyone offers solutions, but there are always forces that benefit from keeping the conflict alive. China is actively engaged in foreign policy, promoting peace-loving theses, but at the same time seeking to reclaim Taiwan. Despite the status of an autonomous territory, Beijing considers it a part of its country. The situation is reminiscent of Russia's conflict with Chechnya, which had economic reasons. China's claims to Taiwan are based on a long political dispute that has lasted almost a century. The disagreement has its roots in the existence of two communist parties. In China, Mao Zedong's party, and in Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek's party, which has long been considered more influential.
А в Китае так получилось. Неудачно. Две коммунистические партии. Одна Мао Цзэдуна, а другая Чан Кайши. И коммунистическая партия Чан Кайши была фаворитом.
The Gandan Party had long enjoyed the support of the Soviet Union and Stalin personally. However, after 1945, the bet was placed on Mao Zedong, who had one significant advantage. He had a Russian wife. Later it turned out that Mao Zedong, Kim Jong Un, and Yumzagin Sidenbal, the leader of Mongolia, had Russian wives. Then the ironic phrase was uttered, "Well, for Asia I am calm." Over time, the wives of Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung disappeared from the public eye, while Sidenbal's wife Olga Nikolaevna, probably not Frolova, remained with him until the end of his reign and played a prominent role. Eastern politics was conducted through various channels, and the presence of the wife in the leader's entourage was an important element of this strategy. The shift from Gandan's support to Mao's party course actually deprived the former of any chance of victory.
Оно в том числе велось по всем направлениям. Жена тоже была очень кстати, и переход от фаворитизма в пользу Гоминдана к коммунистической партии Мао Цзэдуна практически оставил без шансов на победу Гоминдан.
Gandidan evacuated to Taiwan, which today formally retains autonomy, but in fact remains the base of the old Communist Party, much to the annoyance of ideological opponents. This can be compared to if the Trotskyists had survived in modern times. Trotsky was a member of the All-Union Communist Party, led the party, played a key role in the Civil War, and initiated the creation of the camps. If today there were a party supporting the same ideas as United Russia, but not under Putin's leadership, and based, for example, in Siberia, there would be internal conflict. Moscow could start suppressing the regions, Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk, Ulan-Ude, and all the way to Vladivostok.
Сверхединая Россия, которая за то же самое, за что Путин, но руководит ей не Путин. И она бы жила, например, где-нибудь там, условно говоря, в Сибири. Значит, воевали бы уже с Сибирью. Москва бы уже пошла уничтожать Новосибирск, там,
China is not allowed to cede the leadership role. It adheres to a doctrine based on maintaining control over disputed political areas. Taiwan remains a key point of contention for it, as the Gandan Party, a historical adversary in the ideological field, continues to operate there. China insists that Taiwan is its territory because, according to Beijing, the wrong communist government has been installed there. The possibility of conflict remains, although China's actual military capabilities are questionable. The country's image, created through advertising, movies, and technological advances, differs from reality. China's claims to Taiwan demonstrate a desire to play on the global stage using symbolism and political influence rather than force. Instead of scientific achievements, China prefers to participate in international politics by the laws of publicity and showmanship, approaching the Hollywood approach in form. China is pursuing a strategy of coercive pressure, defeating Taiwan and eliminating the Communist Party of Gandanta, with which Chiang Kai-shek is associated, long gone. This builds an image of China as a state with no other agenda than expanding influence. Otherwise, China is acquiring assets around the world. Parts of the former Yugoslavia have already been bought in Europe, a stable economic presence has been formed in Africa, and state-level deals continue in South America. Many people don't notice these processes, seeing them as inconsequential, but China is offering infrastructure, medicine, and basic living conditions in regions where there was no support before. It is economic integration that is bringing tangible benefits. According to the latest data, of the 62 states in Africa with a population of 1.5 billion, only Botswana shows signs of stability. In South Africa and Egypt, living conditions are extremely difficult, sometimes catastrophic. China steps in, offering improvement, though by harsh methods, using economic pressure, buying land, resources, and influence. But with Taiwan, Beijing considers a military option, showing that conflict and admiration for brute force still have a place in global politics. Putin is waging war. China is seeking the right to wage war. Russia remains an irritant used for military purposes. For China, it has become a strategic asset, a bludgeon with which to threaten or attack. In showing support, China has reaffirmed that Russia retains its importance and intends to eliminate the Communist Gandan Party in Taiwan. It is possible that Taiwan will be completely destroyed. Beijing believes it has the right to do so. Russia, left as a tool, is being used as pressure on the West. At the moment of an attack on Taiwan, China can direct Russia, rebuilt with its help, to other targets, such as Estonia. This would create a second round of unresolved conflicts that weak governments cannot handle. Lavrov's visit to Wang Yi confirms this strategy. Thank you, Sergey, for a fascinating historical review. Friends, please leave comments. We read each one and appreciate your activity. As a reminder, Australia's large-scale military exercises with the US kicked off on Sunday amid the escalating situation around Taiwan and growing threats from China. According to the Wall Street Journal, Elbridge Colby, the Pentagon's deputy chief of political affairs, suggests a change in strategy. Instead of supporting Ukraine, focus on containing China.
Точнее, переориентировать вооруженные силы США на противодействие Китаю вместо помощи Украине. Об этом написало издание The Wall Street Journal.
In early June, Elbridge Colby sent a memo to U.S. Defense Secretary Epytus Hegseth, warning that Ukraine's arms requests could further strain the Pentagon's limited stockpiles. The piece questions how reasonable Colby's concerns are, given current defense production capacity, and examines how a shift toward deterring China might impact U.S. strategy, force structure, and resource allocation.
мощностей оборонных подрядчиков и не только? И как переориентация на противодействие Китая может повлиять и на что?
Considering the situation around Ukraine, it is worth noting Trump's statement about the shortage of weapons, against the backdrop of which he stopped deliveries. This step, in fact, was a gesture toward Putin, with whom he soon had a telephone conversation on July 3rd. The dialogue allegedly included a willingness to give up aid to Ukraine for the sake of peace talks, with a hint of seeking a Nobel Prize. Trump later said that supplies would be resumed, but that Europe would be responsible for paying for them. The weapons, which had been in short supply for 15 days, are now allegedly available in sufficient quantities to be transferred to Ukraine through European partners. Moreover, these expenditures will be counted as European countries' contribution to NATO, as Trump has required them to allocate 5% of GDP to defense. Some of these funds are being used to purchase Patriot systems for Ukraine. The US, for example, uses the Italian Beretta pistol. So is there really a weapons shortage, or actually a surplus? Perceptions of the US arsenal mostly come from its own officials. When one claims the country lacks supplies and faces a harsh winter without essentials, public focus shifts, and people start believing in scarcity. This creates the illusion that only America can produce weapons, and if it's short, the world is too. In reality, the global arms market is far more diverse. US military strategy is simply built on maximum self-sufficiency, everything of our own. The Beretta pistol used by the US Army is made in the US because Washington prohibits sourcing personal weapons from abroad. In case of conflict or bombing, supply and production must be secured domestically. The same goes for Steyr trucks. Originally Austrian, they're built in the US as HIMARS platforms. American doctrine insists that all military and security-related production be domestic. Still, similar weapons like AR-15, M16, and M4 rifles are licensed abroad, and many US-used small arms are widely produced on the global market.
Для нашей жизни, для обеспечения нашей безопасности был бы американским. Но весь мир производит все то же самое. И американские Ар-15, М-16, они же М-4 производятся во всем мире. Огромное количество стран в мире занимается тем, что делает основное стрелковое оружие, главную штурмовую винтовку вооруженных сил США.
A huge number of factories around the world produce weapons, and if there is a need to provide the Army of the United States, Ukraine, or any other country, it can be realized not only on American production sites. The AR-15 model, for example, is produced even in Russia, and in Ukraine it is also used, including in combat operations. In addition to domestic production, there are supplies from NATO countries. Missile equipment is more complicated. It requires a high technological base, but even in this segment, the production is not limited to one country. There are other major players on the world stage, including Israel. Israel produces armaments that the US buys with the recognition of their high quality. In addition, European countries and the NATO bloc also have developed defense capabilities, seeking technical unification of armaments.
То, что Америка у него покупает, кусает себе локти и говорит, как жаль, что это еврейские евреи, а не американские евреи, потому что они умнее, чем те, которые у нас. И Европа тоже умеет, тем более блок НАТО, он сводился к тому, чтобы была унификация.
Virtually everything the US Army fires is also produced in Europe. NATO was originally formed on the principle of unification, the same ammunition, calibers, equipment, and armaments, so that the bloc would act as a single system. Therefore, the claim of arms shortage is questionable. In peacetime, the production of high-tech products is slow and rhythmic, but this does not mean a shortage. During World War II, the American industry was completely reprofiled for military purposes. In 1942, the production of passenger cars ceased, and all facilities were transferred to the manufacture of equipment for the front. The main role in providing the army and Lend-Lease deliveries was played by automobile plants.
Абсолютно вся американская промышленность работала на войну. Было остановлено производство легковых автомобилей. В 1942 году больше легковые автомобили в Америке не выпускались. Америка перешла полностью на военные рельсы. И главными как раз в вооружении Соединенных Штатов Америки и, соответственно, поставок по Ленд-Лизу были автомобильные заводы.
The modern defense industry in peacetime works according to a plan. It produces and stocks, but it is not always clear when it will be needed and in what volume, 1,000,000 units or 100,000. In times of war, rapid scaling is required, and it is critical that production takes place where they know how to handle large runs. If the army urgently needs a wristwatch, Swiss craftsmen won't be able to handle it. They don't have the skills to mass produce under deadline pressure. In general, few industries are able to produce products in extreme volumes. The exception is the automobile industry, which has become a universal platform for accelerated production of military equipment. That is why automobiles around the world are considered a sign of technological development. The Soviet Union positioned itself as a developed state not from the moment of launching into space and obtaining nuclear weapons, but from the moment of mastering mass automobile production.
Развитое государство не с того момента, когда Россия полетела в космос и получила ядерное оружие, а с того момента, когда она освоила автомобильную промышленность.
Because, for example, the famous Willys, Jeep, Bantam, aka Ford Jeep PV, it was made in just a month and a half. I mean, from the moment the General Staff said, "We need a Jeep," to the moment it went on the road was just a few weeks, and the car was brilliant. The car was the founder of a whole class. The car became a role model, and it was invented literally on the knees, but by people in the automobile industry who were given the task. When those same engineers were told, airplane, they got a Ford airplane. When they needed engines for tanks, please, can you make a tank? We can. And America, which is now joining in and saying, well, here are Patriot missiles. First of all, it's expensive. Secondly, we have only 2 factories that make them. In general, of course, they are right. And here is just an extensive method. If more Patriots are needed, then they need to work 3 shifts or build another shop. And when, for example, God forbid, World War III does take place and everyone gets involved in it, then those who have an automobile industry will win first and foremost.
Не говоря уже о том, что автомобилей военных, которые в том числе были специально, спешно разработаны.
The famous Willys Jeep, also known as the Jeep Bantam or Ford Jeep PV, was created in just a month and a half. It took only a few weeks from the General Staff's request to the vehicle's appearance on test. The design turned out to be ingenious. It started a new class of vehicles and became a benchmark for many manufacturers. The idea was realized literally on the knees by engineers of the automobile industry who were given a specific task. When an airplane was needed, Ford appeared. When engines for tanks were needed, they were developed, and they were able to create a tank as well. Today, America claims that Patriot missile production is expensive and limited. Only 2 factories. But the solution is obvious. Increase the number of shifts or build another factory. In the event of a global war, the advantage will go to those who have a developed automotive industry that can scale up quickly and produce equipment on a mass scale.
Третья мировая все-таки состоится и все в нее ввяжутся, тогда выиграют в первую очередь те, у кого есть автомобильная промышленность.
The US has a well-developed automotive industry, and if necessary, its capacity can be quickly reoriented to produce Patriot missiles, airplanes, drones, and other equipment. With the largest number of automobile companies in the world, America retains manufacturing flexibility. Unlike China, where the numerical numbers are higher, but the technological results are often inferior. During the Great Leap Forward under Mao Zedong, attempts at large-scale manufacturing resembled backyard blast furnaces, more demonstrative than effective. Meanwhile, Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia are also producing armaments. Indonesia, for example, has a tank industry and has developed production of automobiles, small arms, and artillery. South Korea, particularly Samsung, produces self-propelled artillery units used by NATO countries, along with civilian and construction equipment. Therefore, the U.S. statements about arms shortages raise questions. Global production capabilities are much broader.
Компания Samsung, которая, если что, построит лучший в мире дом, сделает лучший в мире автомобиль, а заодно еще, кстати, делает оружие. И когда Америка разводит руками и говорит, слушайте, стрелять-то нечем.
Statements that it is impossible to fight and Ukraine will not receive aid are manipulation. In fact, weapons are already available, and if necessary, their production in the United States can be quickly increased. Americans act promptly. When a defense order is received, mass production is launched. Jeeps, Ford planes, Cadillac and Chevrolet tanks. In Russia, by contrast, defense funds are often plundered and do not reach the result. Trump, using statements about shortages and the cost of arms, is playing a political game. The weapons are there, or they are not, or they are available, but only at Europe's expense. This is political maneuvering. In reality, there are enough weapons to affect the outcome of the war. Everything depends on whether Ukraine gets the opportunity to use them to win. This is where politics begins. The question is whether they want us to win this war. Trump once again voiced disappointment in Putin, noting that he thought he was a man of his word. Trump's major statement on Russia is expected today. Retired U.S. Admiral Mark Montgomery noted two areas of concern in the interview. The first is possible sanctions. He allegedly asked the Senate to pass the 2025 Sanctions Act, which would allow the president to impose duties against countries that buy oil and gas from Russia, including China, India, and Turkey. The second is increased defense support for Ukraine. Supplies of air defense systems, artillery, anti-missile systems, and possibly using presidential powers to speed up logistics.
То, о чем мы с вами говорим, артиллерии, противоракетных комплексов и, возможно, даже об использовании президентских полномочий, чтобы ускорить логистику.
A third area, according to Mark Montgomery, is the provision of offensive weapons to Ukraine, although he expresses doubts about the feasibility of this step. The issue of presidential authority, especially regarding the possibility of swiftly imposing new duties on Russian energy products, is related to mechanisms for bypassing congressional approval in emergencies. The global aspects of military support have already been discussed, and Trump's expected statement on Russia, if made today, will be another touch in the complex picture of American foreign policy. The world is now watching Trump's actions, assessing his ability to make strategic decisions. Has he opened it yet? Yes, he did. Did he read the first page? He did. Everything we know, Trump doesn't know. We're watching. A test? Failed. We'll have to rewrite it. We know for a fact that Putin is a criminal. That's not what Trump thinks. He says to the whole world, there are 7 billion of you out there. You don't understand. I do understand. Putin is a good guy. We'll talk to him. We wait. When will Trump realize otherwise? So far, he hasn't gotten it. He continues, looked at it. Putin is a good guy. Yes, he's killing Ukrainians, but he's frozen. We know that Putin will continue, and Trump doesn't know that. Then he comes up with some wild ideas, duties, embargoes, sanctions.
Мы знаем, что Путин негодяй, что Путин будет этим заниматься, а Трамп этого не знает. Потом Трамп звонит, Трамп приезжает, у него рождаются какие-то дикие идеи, он там пошлинами кого-то как-то обыграет, какие-то там эмбарго будут, какие-то санкции.
Sanctions against North Korea have not changed the situation. Kim Jong Un has remained in place. Iran has been living under sanctions for decades, and its nuclear program is getting closer and closer to the tipping point. Now Trump is revisiting the topic by opening a textbook and finding a chapter on sanctions. We know where this is going. He doesn't. Again, talk of duties. Again, the illusion of control. He claims Putin is a peacemaker, but we know he isn't. Trump, having reached the new section, it's as if he's opening his eyes. Putin is not seeking peace. He is continuing the war and openly says so. Cites reasons that he has supposedly explained repeatedly, suggesting that Trump asked for translators. We know the answer in advance. Putin will not stop. He acts on impulse, driven not by the goal, but by the process itself. And for such an aggressor, the most important thing is continuity. Putin cares about the victim suffering and staying alive. He continues to act without seeking to end the conflict. Trump does not understand this. He too knows how to press, break, and rule through force. but he is inferior to Putin in toughness. We wait for Trump to finally realize the obvious, but he continues to read the textbook without internalizing the basic truths. And then it turns out that on Thursday he calls Putin bad. On Sunday he repeats it. And suddenly there's no difference between those versions. It seems the doctor didn't let him go for the weekend, and the pills stayed the same. The appointments are stable, and apparently Trump has been taking them all week.
Вдруг получается, что в четверг Трамп заявляет: Путин плохой парень. И в воскресенье подтверждает: Путин плохой парень. А воскресный от четвергового вдруг почему-то не отличается. Ну, во-первых, мы из этого делаем вывод, что все-таки врача на выходные не отпустили. То есть таблетки одни и те же. Медикаментозные назначения не только сделаны лечащим врачом Трампа, но еще он добился того, чтобы Трамп таблетки принимал всю неделю.
That's why Trump's position on Putin, announced on Thursday, matched his statements on Sunday. Now he says he's come up with something big, he's going to do something, but it's unclear whether he'll remember it by lunchtime. The attending physician may leave for a break, at which point Trump will find a microphone in the White House and start improvising. He has no arguments, no ideas, no suggestions, so he's left to juggle words. The 500% duty statement only drew a chuckle. No one took it seriously. The world didn't even react. He also suddenly said that he once warned Putin, if he attacks Ukraine, he will bomb Moscow. This statement clearly refers to before the war started, and before the war. How then?
И мир, например, по этому поводу не то, что не вздрогнул, даже не начал как-то суетиться. Ну, Трамп сказал, что будут пошлины 500%. А еще тут ведь выяснилось, что Трамп с повинной явился и сказал: в давние стародавние времена я Путина предупреждал, что разбомблю Москву, если он нападет на Украину. Ну, то есть разговор-то явно был не когда уже началась война, а если нападет, то тогда. То есть это было где-то до войны. А до войны когда?
We are talking, among other things, about the events of 2014, the attack on Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. At that time, Trump was already president or on his way to that status. If he did say he would strike Moscow in case of aggression, then the weakness of his position was obvious to Putin from the start. When a politician declares that he will use his full military potential in response to an attack, but does nothing afterward, he loses credibility. In the world, it is perceived as empty words, sanctions, duties, promises of arms. All this looks frivolous. The world is watching what actions Putin will take and what actions Trump will take. Putin remains consistent in his aggression. His approach is stable. And Trump has new statements, loud numbers, possible deliveries, discussion of Patriot missiles, and reliance on European support. Expectations of reform, a change of course, or a revolutionary approach are not borne out. As long as Trump is reading a political primer, no grounds for real change are in sight.
У Путина все та же, кремлевская: здоров и убивает украинцев. А у Трампа какая таблетка? А у Трампа, кажись, новая. Что будет? 700%? Или, например, 3 ракеты Patriot, потому что, наконец-то, Европа купит 3. Или будет что-то совсем кардинально новое. Ну, мы, конечно, ждем, что Трамп дочитал букварь и перешел к какому-то следующему справочнику по России. Но рассчитывает на то, что революционное что-то грандиозное состоится.
After Trump's statement, whether it was on Friday or another day, Russia reportedly reacted alarmingly and talked about the possibility of dialogue. Dmitriev, the main negotiator between the Kremlin and the US, published a post on social network X in which he noted that constructive dialogue between Russia and the US is always more beneficial than the outdated language of pressure. He also emphasized that only cooperation gives true peace, stability, and global security. In the text, he mentioned Biden, probably aiming to please Trump. The question is how much the Kremlin takes Trump's rhetoric seriously, given his fickle moods. This looks like either a reaction to a real threat or an element of an information maneuver.
потому что у Трампа настроение меняется, и это действительно проявление страха или элемент информационного маневра. Как вы
When
думаете?
reading such statements, much depends on intonation. The same text can be perceived as a diplomatically balanced proposal for dialogue or as a veiled ultimatum. Dmitriev wrote that dialogue is preferable to pressure, and this can be interpreted as a call for constructive communication or as a warning. You should not press, or you will get a harsh response. Behind the polite wording can be a threat, and in the text you may hear not the sentence, "let's talk," but the certainty, "we will start to press and you will not have time to react." Perception depends on the reader. Even within the same circle of opinion, interpretations can differ. Russia, in fact, shows disdain. America is not an authority for it. Trump appears and disappears, first calling Putin a peacemaker, then a criminal, then disappearing again and returning. His actions seem chaotic, and this also affects the way American signals are perceived in Moscow.
Мы сейчас как тут примемся вас давить, что вы уже не успеете поднять телефонную трубку и начать с нами вести диалог. Но о том, поняли или не поняли, ну, даже на примере друг друга мы видим, что к этому можно отнестись по-разному, услышать совершенно разное. Россия, которая абсолютно без разницы, что там Америка? Америка. Вот Трамп прибежал тут, ломился в ворота, обзывался сначала хорошими словами «ты миротворец», потом плохими, говорил, что даже матерился, потом убежал куда-то, потом опять прибежал.
Did it affect anything? Russia continues to kill Ukrainians on a daily basis. Diplomats and politicians are holding meetings, making statements, traveling around the countries, trying to somehow explain what is happening. But none of this has stopped the war. Russia calls itself a supporter of peace, organizes negotiations in Istanbul and Riyadh, but it does not stop shooting. Its goal remains unchanged: the extermination of Ukrainians. Another statements of diplomats sound against the background of alleged changes in mood. But earlier Russia did not react to the United States, and now suddenly started talking about dialogue. This is not directly related to Trump's statements, but rather to the expectation of other events. Russia is acting consistently. The above text is not an invitation to negotiations, but a demonstration. If it is not possible to reach an agreement, a tougher approach will be used.
Имеет отношение к каким-то ожидаемым событиям. Россия убивала и будет убивать. И этот текст о том, что, ну, вы не смогли договариваться, у вас не получилось с нами пообщаться, да? Ну, так, знаете, методы давления будут хуже.
Sergey, reports say Poland is sending 235,000 summonses for military medical checks. According to a Polish outlet, this includes older men, women, and those over 50, suggesting expanded preparations amid rising tensions. While it may not mean immediate mobilization, it likely reflects a planned update of those who could serve if needed, as European and NATO countries boost readiness.
Как вы думаете, если мы говорим о странах Европы, НАТО и в общем?
Many countries are returning to the conscript army model. Lithuania has already restored it. Germany is considering this step. France is preparing for change, and Poland is active. There is mobilization activity in the region. Countries are digging trenches, withdrawing from anti-personnel mine ban agreements, and strengthening borders. In the course of the conflict, Poland has made a number of vulnerabilities. Objects have fallen into its territory, air attacks have occurred, and civilian casualties have occurred. The response has been restrained. The draft is being expanded to compensate for domestic unpreparedness. Latvia faced a similar situation when a drone operated freely over its territory, demonstrating the lack of operational response mechanisms.
Только развела руками и сказала, что-то прилетело, что ли, поубивало кого-то. Ну мы тут если что, сейчас людей побольше наберем. Ну, потому что убивают же, да? И Латвия проспала дрон, который прилетел и летал над Латвией, сколько ему хотелось, и выяснилось, что не готова Латвия.
Recently, a drone was detected over Lithuania. Fighter jets were raised. The object was identified, but unresolved issues remained. Estonia found itself in a vulnerable position when it attempted to detain a Russian Jaguar tanker in neutral waters, and a Polish MiG-29 immediately left the area, leaving the country without air cover. Estonia counted on NATO protection, but found itself alone. The Baltic states look unprepared. Latvia and Estonia are virtually open to outside interference. Poland has faced repeated strikes but reacted with restraint, now expanding the scope of conscription to include the elderly and women to assess capacity. All this suggests that the countries of the region are actively preparing, but are doing so weakly and uncertainly because they have lost practical experience.
Стариков, женщин и детей берут, наверное, попробовать на зуб, может, они в армии сгодятся на что-нибудь. Это все в совокупности говорит, в общем-то, о том, что страны готовятся. Готовятся пока неопытно, очень слабенько, потому что просто растеряли навык.
European countries do not fully understand how to prepare for war. Lithuania has clearly defined that the future of armed conflicts involves the use of drones. The main thing now is not the number of soldiers with assault rifles, but the number of trained drone operators capable of using personal weapons if necessary. Under Defense Minister Kosciunas, Lithuania began training reservists as drone operators, abandoning the outdated model of trenches and carrying shells. One operator with 100 drones can replace 100 fighters, with each drone a sniper threat. For small nations like Lithuania, this is strategically important. Latvia has recognized this logic, but has not yet had time to implement training, as was evident after the recent Russian drone test. Everyone understands, war is not just possible, it is inevitable. The question is not whether it will happen, but when it will start, and who will be the enemy. Poland, like the rest of Europe, has delayed the necessary steps for too long and is now rapidly catching up.
И понятно, какая это будет война. И теперь Польша очень запоздала на 2,5 года, на самом деле на 3,5, так же, как и вся Европа, берется за ум.
Will they make it? Can they do it? Will they learn? Countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, despite their small size, are now ready to resist. Vulnerable at first glance, but if attacked, they may prove as difficult a target as Finland in 1939, when the Soviet Union tried to absorb it and failed. Then the USSR pulled out of the League of Nations, the interbrigades resisted, weapons came in secretly, and although no one openly supported Finland, it received tacit solidarity. Finland fought back so strongly that even now it is remembered. And Finland is treated very differently. It inspires fear. Ukraine and the Baltic states do not yet evoke the same reaction, but if they show the ability to resist, the perception will change. History remembers where the blows were unexpectedly painful. Poland seeks to take a position comparable to that already held by the Baltic states. They are succeeding, especially Lithuania, whose defense training model is reminiscent of Finland in 1939. Lithuania in 2025 has become a hard nut to swallow. Poland formally declares readiness, but in fact, for the last 3.5 years, despite airspace violations, including cases with helicopters, no serious response has been taken. The gap between declarations and actual actions remains significant. Sergey, if we're talking about NATO's activation, better late than never. Thank you for the important and insightful conversation. Always a pleasure. A reminder. Today we spoke with Sergei Aslanyan, host of Khodorkovsky Live, wishing everyone a peaceful and productive day. See you soon. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to Channel 24 and Sergei Aslanyan's YouTube channel. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
канал Сергея Слоняна. Всем до встречи.